In June 1938, I arrive in Graz, in the picturesque province of Styria, to report for assignment to this unit as a senior cadet officer. 3 months ago, German troops entered Austria, and the population is full of enthusiasm. The squadron stationed in the village of Thillerhof has recently received U-87s, and the single-seat Henschels will no longer be used as dive bombers. The basics of combat training are practicing dives at all possible angles up to 90 degrees, flying in formation, firing airborne weapons, and bombing. We soon become well acquainted with this program. That's not to say I learned quickly. Besides, the other pilots have been through all these tests before I arrive. It takes me too long to catch up with them. Too long for my squadron commander to be satisfied. I'm grasping so slowly that he stops believing I'll ever even master all of this at all. My position is not made any easier by the fact that I spend my spare hours in the mountains or playing sports, rather than talking in the officers' mess hall. And when I do show up there, I settle for a glass of milk. In the meantime, I am promoted to the rank of flying officer, and on Christmas Day, 1938, the squadron is ordered to allocate an officer to train as a reconnaissance pilot. All the other squadrons returned blank forms, none of them willing to release their men. Nevertheless, the offer proved to be a splendid opportunity to send a milk lover into the middle of nowhere. Naturally, I objected. I wanted to stay with the Stukas, but all my efforts to put sticks in the wheels of the war machine were to no avail. Thus, in January 1939, I, in total despair, began classes at the flight school for scouts in Hildesheim. We were lectured on the theory and practice of aerial surveying, and at the end of the course a rumor passed that we would be sent to serve in units that would have to fly special missions for the Air Force Command. In a reconnaissance airplane, the observer also plays the role of navigator, and we were all trained accordingly. Instead of piloting the airplane, we had to sit still and trust our lives to the pilot, whom we naturally treated as an amateur, prophesying that one day he would crash, and we along with him. We learned aerial photography, taking vertical and panoramic photos in the Hildesheim area. The rest of the time was devoted to monotonous theory. At the end of the course, we were assigned to our units. I was transferred to the 2F-121 Long-Range Air Reconnaissance Squadron in Prenzlau. 2 months later, we were transferred to the Schneidemmel area. The war with Poland had begun. I will never forget my first flight across the border of another country. I sit tensely in my airplane, waiting for what is to happen next. We are in awe of the anti-aircraft fire and treat it with considerable reverence. Polish fighters take to the air, rarely and with great delay. What was a dry subject in the classroom now becomes an exciting reality. We photograph the railroad stations at Thorn and Kulm to establish the direction of movement and areas of concentration of Polish troops. Later, our missions take us further east to the Brest-Litovsk-Kovel-Lutsk railroad line. The High Command wants to know how the Poles are regrouping in the east and what the Russians are doing. For missions in the southern zone, we use Breslau as a base. The war in Poland is soon over, and I return to Prenzlau with the Iron Cross, 2nd degree. Here, my commander immediately realizes that I have no heart for reconnaissance flights. But he believes that in the current state of affairs, my request for transfer to the dive bomber unit will not be successful. Indeed, several of my attempts have come to nothing. We spend the winter in Fritzlar near Kassel. Our squadron flies in the west and northwest, taking to the air from border airfields. We fly at very high altitudes, and therefore each squadron has to undergo a special examination to check their suitability for such flights. The verdict in Berlin was that I could not pass the test for suitability to fly at high altitude. Since the Stukas fly at low altitude, my squadron supports a petition for transfer to a dive bomber unit, and I gain hope that I can be reunited with my first love. However, when 2 crews go missing one after the other, I am again sent for examination. This time I'm deemed exceptionally fit to fly at high altitudes. Obviously, they made a mistake the first time. But although the ministry does not give specific orders about my assignment, I am transferred to Stammersdorf to the Aviation Training Regiment, which later moves to Crailsheim. During the campaign in France, I act as adjutant of the regiment. All my attempts to bypass the proper channels and directly contact the Luftwaffe personnel department do not help. I draw information about the war from the radio and newspapers. I had never been so downhearted as at this time. I felt as if I had been severely punished. Only sport, to which I gave all my energy and every spare minute, brought me some relief. During this time, I rarely took to the air, and even then only in a light sport airplane. My main job was military training of recruits. On a weekend flight, in the worst weather in a Heinkel 70 with the commander as a passenger, I almost crashed in the Swabian Alps. But we were lucky and returned safely to Crailsheim. My countless letters and phone calls finally had an effect, probably because I was considered a bore to get rid of. And so I returned to my old dive bomber regiment in Graz, which was currently based at Cannes on the English Channel. The fighting here has almost come to an end, and my friend, with whom I served with back in Graz, during training passes on to me his experience of flying in Poland and France. I learned his lessons quite quickly, as I have been waiting for this moment for 2 whole years. But no one can grasp everything in a couple of days, and even now I'm not learning new things too quickly. I have no practical experience. Here, in the French atmosphere of the eternal pursuit of entertainment, my way of life, my taste for sport, and my habit of drinking milk are even more suspicious than before. And so when our squadron is transferred to the southeast of Europe, I am sent to a reserve unit in Graz to await further orders. Will I ever learn my trade? The campaign in the Balkans begins, and once again I find myself out of action. Graz is temporarily used as a base for dive bombers. It's hard to see. There's a war going on in Yugoslavia and Greece, and I'm sitting at home practicing formation flying, bombing, and airborne weapons fire. I do this for 3 weeks, and one fine morning I suddenly say to myself, now the bell is finally rung, and you can do whatever you want with the airplane. And it's true. My instructors are amazed. Deal and Joachim can pull all kinds of stunts when they lead our so-called circus, but my car always keeps its place in formation, right behind them, as if I were attached by an invisible rope, whether they are starting a loop, diving, or flying upside down. During a training bombing run, I almost never put a bomb further than 10 meters from the target. In aerial gunnery, I usually score 90 points out of 100. In other words, I'm done with training. The next time a request comes in for replenishment for a squadron at the front, I will be one of them. Shortly after the Easter vacation, which I spend skiing around Prebical, the long-awaited moment arrives. The order comes to transfer the airplane to the Stuk squadron stationed in southern Greece. At the same time comes the order about my transfer to this part. I fly through Agram and Skopje to Argos. Here I learn that I have to go further south. The squadron is at Molai, at the southernmost tip of the Peloponnesus. For one who has had a classical education, the flight is particularly impressive and awakens many school memories. I, without wasting any time, report to the commander of my new unit that I have arrived. I am deeply excited. My hour has finally come, and I will soon take part in serious military operations. The first person to greet me is the adjutant. His and my face simultaneously turns grim. We are old acquaintances. This is my instructor from Cannes. What are you doing here? He asks. His tone affects me like a cold shower. Reporting for arrival. You won't get any combat missions until you learn how to fly the Stuka properly. I can barely contain my anger, but I keep myself under control even as he adds with a humiliating smile. Have you learned anything since then? An icy silence, until I broke the intolerable pause. I know how to fly an airplane. Almost contemptuously, or was it just me? He speaks with an accent that sends an icy wave over me. I'll refer your case to the commander and hope for the best. Let him decide. That's all. You can go and get cleaned up. As I step out of the tent into the blinding sunshine, I blink, not just because it's so bright. I fight the growing sense of despair inside me. then common sense tells me that I have no reason to give up hope. The adjutant may be predisposed against me, but his opinion of me is one thing, and the commander's judgment may be quite different. Suppose even that the adjutant has this influence over the commander, but is it possible that the decision will not be made in my favor? No, it is unlikely that the commander will hesitate, because he does not even know me and will certainly form his own opinion. The order to report to the commander immediately interrupts my musings. I am sure he will decide for himself what to do with me. I report. He responds to my greeting rather apathetically and subjects me to a long and silent examination. Then he, stretching his words, pronounces, "We already know each other," and perhaps noticing the look of disagreement on my face, waves away my silent protest with a motion of his hand. "Of course we do, since my adjutant knows everything about you. I know you from his words so well that until further notice you will not be flying with my squadron. That's if in the future we run short of men." I can't hear what he's saying to me. For the first time something comes over me, some feeling deep in my stomach, a feeling I haven't experienced in years, until one day when I was returning in an airplane riddled with enemy bullets and a serious loss of blood that drained my strength. I have no idea how long the commander is talking, and even less I know what he's talking about. A rebellion is bubbling up inside me, and I can feel the warning hammering in my head. "No, don't do this. Don't do it." Then the adjutant's voice brings me back to reality. At ease. I see him for the first time. Up until this moment, I'm not sure he's present. He looks at me with a stony stare. I have now regained full control of myself. A few days later, the operation to take Crete begins. The engines roar over the airfield. I sit in my tent. Crete is a test of strength between the Stukas and the British fleet. Crete is an island. According to all military axioms, only a superior naval force can take the island from the British. England is a naval power. We are not. Of course not, because Gibraltar prevents us from bringing our ships into the Mediterranean. But this military axiom, England's supremacy at sea, is now being called into question by the bombs of our dive bombers. And I sit alone in my tent. Until further notice, you will not fly with my squadron. Thousands of times a day this sentence enrages me, arrogant, sarcastic, making me a laughingstock. Outside, there are voices of aircrews excitedly talking about their experiences and the landings of our airborne troops. Sometimes I try to convince one of them to let me fly in his place. It's no use. Even a friendly bribe accomplishes nothing for me. Once in a while, I think I can read something like sympathy on my coworkers' faces, and then my throat dries up with more bitter anger. When an airplane takes off, I want to plug my ears so I don't hear the music of the engines. But I can't. I listen. I can't help myself. The Stukas are running continuously, one flight after another. They're making history somewhere out there, in the Battle of Crete, and I'm sitting in my tent, sobbing with rage. We already know each other. Quite the opposite. Not in the slightest degree. I'm quite sure that even now I could be useful to the squadron. I know how to fly. I have the will to accomplish the task. A predisposition stands between me and the chance of a night's spurs. A predisposition of my superior who refuses to give me the opportunity to convince him that his judgment is wrong. I am going to prove against his judgment that I have been treated unfairly. I will not allow this prejudice against me to exist. That's no way to treat subordinates. I realize that now. Again and again the flames of defiance rage within me. Discipline, discipline, discipline. Control yourself. Only through self-restraint can you achieve anything. You must learn to understand everything, even mistakes, even the blindness of senior officers. There's no other way to make yourself more fit than they are for the role of commander. And understand the mistakes of your subordinates. Stay in your tent and keep your temper in check. Your time will come. Never lose confidence. The operation on Crete has come to an end. I was ordered to take the damaged airplane to the repair shop in Cottbus and wait there for further orders. Once again, I returned to Germany via Sofia and Belgrade. In Cottbus, I do not receive any news about the squadron and have no idea what they are going to do with me. In recent days, rumors of a new company have spread, based on the fact that numerous ground teams and flying formations have moved east. Most of the people I've discussed these rumors with believe that the Russians will allow us to pass through their territory into the Middle East so we can get closer to the oil fields and undermine Britain's military capabilities. But all this is pure speculation. At 4 a.m. on June 22, I hear on the radio, war with Russia has just been declared. Waiting for dawn, I go to the hangar where the planes belonging to the Immelmann squadron are being repaired and ask if they have any already in good working order. Shortly before noon, the repair of one of the airplanes is finished, and nothing can hold me back any longer. My squadron is believed to be standing somewhere on the border with East Prussia. First, in order to make inquiries, I land at Insterburg. Here I receive information from Luftwaffe headquarters. The place I am to head to is called Raski and is to the southeast. I land there half an hour later and find myself among a lot of planes that have just returned from a mission and are about to take off again after being refueled and loaded with ammunition. The whole field is jammed with airplanes. The search for my squadron, which met me so inhospitably during the company in Greece, is taking up quite a bit of my time. At headquarters, everyone is busy flying, and they have no time for me. The commander informs me through the adjutant that I am to report my arrival in the first group. I report to the group commander, who welcomes me and is not about to become in opposition to me just because someone has labeled me a black sheep. He is skeptical of what his colleagues in the squadron say about me, and I have an initial advantage as he is not predisposed to me negatively. I have to hand over to them the airplane I flew in from Cottbus, but I am allowed to participate in the next sortie in some completely pre-doped machine. I have only one thought in my mind. I'm going to show you all that I know my job, and your predisposition toward me is unfair. I fly wingman with the group commander who assigns me to make sure the technical requirements are met. With the help of the senior mechanic, I have to ensure that as many aircraft as possible participate in each sortie and also liaise with the squadron engineer. During the flights, I'm like a rabbit attached to the tail of my lead, so he gets nervous about whether I'm going to ram him from behind until he's sure I'm in control of my machine. By the evening of the first day, I had already made 4 sorties to the front line between Grodno and Volkovisk. The Russians have brought here huge masses of tanks and trucks. We see mostly KV-1, KV-2, and T-34 tanks. We bomb the tanks, anti-aircraft artillery, and ammunition depots to supply the tanks and infantry. The same, the next day, the first sortie at 3 a.m., the last landing at 10 p.m. We have to forget about a good night's rest. Every free minute we lie down under the airplane and instantly fall asleep. Then, if someone calls, we jump to our feet, not even realizing where the voice came from. We move as if in a dream. On the first flight out, I noticed the countless fortifications built along the border. They stretch for many hundreds of kilometers. Some of them are still unfinished. We fly over unfinished airfields. There is a newly built concrete runway. Here airplanes are already parked. For example, along the road to Vitebsk, along which our troops are advancing, there is one of such almost completed airfields with many Martin bombers. They are either short of fuel or crews. Flying over these airfields and fortifications, everyone realizes we struck in time. It seems the Soviets were making these preparations to set up a base for an invasion against us. Who else in the West would Russia want to attack? If the Russians had completed their preparations, there would be little hope of stopping them. Our task: to attack the enemy in front of the shock wedges of our armies. For a short time we stand at Ula, Lepel, and Janovici. Our targets are always the same: tanks, vehicles, bridges, field fortifications, and anti-aircraft batteries. Sometimes railroad stations or armored trains appear on the target list, which the Soviets try to use to support their troops with artillery. Resistance in front of our wedges must be broken in order to increase the speed and strength of our offensive. Defense varies from section to section. Ground defense is considerable, from small arms fire to volleys from anti-aircraft guns, even if we do not mention machine gun fire from the air. The Russians have only one fighter, the I-16 Rada, vastly inferior to our Mi-109. Wherever these rats appear, they are shot down like flies. They have not become serious opponents for our Messerschmitts, but they are maneuverable and, of course, much faster than our Stukas. Therefore, we cannot completely ignore them. The Soviet Air Force, both fighter and bomber units, have been mercilessly destroyed, both in the air and on the ground. Their firepower is weak. Their machines, such as the Martin bomber and the DV-3, are obsolete. There is almost no sight of the new type of P-2 aircraft. Only later American deliveries of twin-engine Boston bombers become visible. At night, we are often raided by small planes whose purpose is to keep us awake and disrupt supplies. They do not usually have much success. This is the first time this has happened in Leppel. Some of my colleagues who slept in a tent pitched in the woods became their victims. Wherever these kites, as we call these small cable-tied biplanes, see a burning light, they drop small fragmentation bombs. They do this everywhere, even on the front lines. Often they turn off their engines to make them harder to spot and plan. All we can hear is the wind whistling through their stretch marks. Small bombs are dropped in complete silence, and immediately their engines start up again. This is not so much a conventional method of warfare as an attempt to unhinge our nerves. The group gets a new commander, Lieutenant Steen. He comes from the same unit in which I received my first lessons in Stuka flying. He gets used to the fact that I follow him like a shadow and stay only a few meters away from him while diving on the target. His marksmanship is amazing, but if he misses, I'm sure to cover the target. The following planes can drop their bombs on anti-aircraft guns and other targets. He is delighted, and when the squadron immediately informs him of all the favorite lambs, myself listed among them, he says nothing back to them. One day they ask him, "Well, how is Rudel all right?" When he replies, "He's the best pilot I've ever flown with. There are no more questions." He recognizes my abilities, but on the other hand, he warns that I won't last long because I'm crazy. The term is used partly in jest as an assessment of one pilot by another. He knows that I usually dive almost to the ground to make sure the target is hit accurately and the bombs are not wasted. "It will get you in trouble someday," is his opinion. Overall, he may be right, but so far I've been lucky. But the experience comes with each new flight. I owe a great debt of gratitude to Steen and consider myself lucky to be flying with him. However, these few weeks it looks as if his predictions are about to come true. During low-altitude attacks on a road the Russians are trying to advance on, one of our planes is damaged and makes an emergency landing. Our comrade's plane lands in a small clearing surrounded by brush and Russians. The team seeks shelter under the airplane. On the sand I see fountains from bullets fired from Russian machine guns. If our pilots are not picked up, they are dead. But the Reds are already near. Damn it, I've got to pick them up. I release the flaps and plan for the ground. I can already make out the light green shape of the Ivans among the bushes. Boom! A machine gun round hits the engine. There is no point in landing on a damaged airplane. If I can even land, we won't be able to take off afterwards. My comrades are finished. When I see them for the last time, they wave at us. The engine runs with great interruptions at first, but then it somehow gets better, giving me a chance to rise above the undergrowth at the other end of the clearing. Oil is whipping against the windshield of the cab, and at any moment I expect one of the pistons to stop. If it does, my engine will stall forever. Red right below me, they dash to the ground, some of them opening fire. The planes climb to an altitude of about 300 meters and emerge from the tornado of small arms fire. My engine holds steady until I reach the front line. Then it stops and I land. I am taken back to the base in a truck. Officer Cadet Bauer has just arrived here. I know him from the days when he learned to fly in Graz. He later distinguished himself in combat, and one of the few managed to survive this company. But the day he joined us could hardly be called a happy day. I damaged the right wing of the airplane because a thick cloud of dust enveloped me while taxiing, causing me to collide with another airplane. This means I have to replace the wing, but there is no spare on the airfield. I am told that one damaged airplane is still standing on our old runway at Ula, but its right wing is intact. Steen is enraged. You'll fly when your airplane is in good working order, and not before. Being chained to the ground is a severe punishment. Anyway, the last sortie for today is now over, and I'm flying back to Ula. 2 mechanics from another squadron have been left here to help me. During the night we, with the help of a few infantrymen, put a new wing on my airplane. At 3 o'clock in the morning we finish the job and rest for a few minutes. I report my arrival in a serviceable airplane just in time to participate in the first sortie at 4:30. My commander chuckles and shakes his head. In a few days I am transferred to the 3rd Squadron as an engineering officer and must bid farewell to the 1st Squadron. Steen can't stop my transfer. I am just arriving when the squadron commander leaves the unit, and a new one is appointed to take his place. Who is he? Lieutenant Steen. Your transfer wasn't half so bad a job. You see for yourself now. Yes, one should never blame fate, says Steen when we meet him again. When he joins us in the tent in Janovici, where the officers' mess tent is located, there is a real commotion. A local old man is trying to fill his lighter from a large iron canister of gasoline, just as he flicks it to make sure it works. There is a terrible rumble. The canister explodes in his face. A disappointing waste of good gasoline. Many old ladies would be happy to trade it for a few eggs. Of course, this is forbidden, because gasoline is intended for quite different purposes than alcohol, which is made by the locals. Everything is a matter of habit, though. The altar of the village church has been turned into a movie room, the nave into a stable. Every nation has its own customs, says Steen with a chuckle. The Smolensk-Moscow highway is the target of many sorties. It is crammed with a huge amount of military equipment and property. Trucks and tanks line up behind each other almost without intervals, often in 3 parallel columns. If it all moved on us, I can't think much when attacking the stationary target. Now, in just a few days, the whole thing will turn into a sea of rubble. The army is moving forward, and nothing can stop it. Soon we will be relocated to Dukaushchina, not far from the railway station of Yartsevo, for which heavy fighting will then begin. One of the next days, a Rata dives right into our formation and rams a Bauer. Rata goes down and Bauer returns home in a seriously damaged vehicle. That night, Moscow radio praises the Soviet pilot who rammed and shot down the damned Nazi dive bomber. Radio is always right, and since childhood we love to listen to fairy tales. It is very hot in Rakilditsi in the summer. The minute the service ends, we lie down on our hiking bunks in the coolness of the tents. Our commander lives in the same tent as us. We don't have to talk much, but we have a sense of mutual understanding. We must be similar in character. In the evening, after sorting out the flights, he goes for a walk in the forest or on the steppe. And I, if not accompanying him, I lift weights, throw the discus, and jog around the airfield. In this way we rest after a hard day and wake up fresh and rested the next morning. Afterward, we settle down in our tent. He is not a drinker and has nothing against the fact that I don't drink. After reading a book for a while, he looks at someone in a mug and remarks, "Well, Weinig, you must be quite tired today." And before they can deny it, "Well, good, then it's time to go to bed." We always go to bed early, and that's fine with me. Live and let another live is his motto. Steen's past experiences are the same as mine. He utilizes it and wants to be a better commander than the officers he served under himself. When flying, he has a strange influence on us. He doesn't like dense anti-aircraft fire as much as anyone else, but no air defense can be so powerful as to force him to drop bombs from high altitude. He is an excellent comrade, an exceptionally good officer, and a first-class pilot. The combination of these virtues makes him a truly rare bird. Stein's gunner is the oldest soldier in our squadron, non-commissioned officer Lehman. I have the youngest, Corporal Alfred Charnowski. Alfred is the 13th child in a simple East Prussian family. He rarely opens his mouth, and perhaps for that reason, nothing can throw him off balance. With him I never have to worry about enemy fighters, for no Ivan can be more gloomy than my Alfred. Here in Reykjavik, sometimes there are real storms. The vast expanse of Russia has a continental climate, and one has to pay for the blessed cool weather with storms. At the height of the day, suddenly everything goes dark, and the clouds crawl almost to the ground. It rains like a bucket. Visibility is reduced to just a few meters. As a rule, when we encounter a storm in the air, we tend to fly around it. However, sooner or later, I'll inevitably have to face the weather up close. We support our army in the Luga sector of the front. From time to time, we are also sent on missions far behind enemy lines. The target of one such mission is the Chudovo railroad station, an important transportation hub on the Moscow-Leningrad line. From the experience of past missions, we know that there is a strong air defense there. The anti-aircraft fire is very dense, but until fresh enemy fighter formations arrive, we do not foresee any special surprises here. Just before we take off, our airfield is attacked by a group of Russian attack planes, which we nicknamed Iron Gustavs. We rush for cover, dug in behind the airplanes. Lieutenant Stahl jumps down last and lands right on my back. This is even more unpleasant than the Iron Gustavs raid. Our anti-aircraft guns open fire on them. The Gustavs drop their bombs and leave, clinging to the ground. Then we take off. Course: northeast, height 3,000 meters. Not a cloud in the sky. I'm flying as wingman to the commander. During the flight, I catch up with him and look into the cockpit. After a while, the dark blue waters of Lake Ilmen begin to sparkle ahead. How many times have we flown this route to Novgorod, located at the northern end of the lake, or to Stara Russa on the southern side? As we approach the target, a black storm wall rises on the horizon. Is it in front of the target or behind it? I see Steen studying his map, and now we are flying through a thick cloud, an hour-long thunderstorm front. I can't find the target. It's down there somewhere, under the storm clouds. According to the clock, we're very close to it now. In this monotonous landscape, the patchwork clouds make it difficult to orient ourselves by eye. For a few seconds we fly in darkness, then light again. I get within a few meters of Steen so I don't lose him in the clouds. If I lose him, we might collide. But why doesn't Steen turn back? Surely we can't attack in such a storm. The planes flying behind us are also starting to reorganize. They must have had the same thought as me. Perhaps the commander is trying to find the enemy front line with the intention of attacking multiple targets there. He goes lower, but the clouds are all over the place. Steen takes his eyes off his map and suddenly tilts the car sharply. Most likely he has finally taken the bad weather into account, but has not paid attention to the proximity of my car. My reaction is lightning fast. I sharply throw the airplane to the side and lay a deep turn. The plane is tilted at such an angle that it is already flying almost upside down with its wheels. It is carrying 700 kilograms of bombs, and now this weight is pulling us down with an irresistible force. I disappear into the cloudy, inky layer. All around me is absolute blackness. I can hear the whistling and thumping of the wind. Rain seeps into the cabin. Lightning flashes from time to time and illuminates everything around me. Violent gusts of wind shake the cockpit, and the body of the airplane shakes and shakes. There is no earth in sight, no horizon on which I could level the airplane. The needle of the vertical speed indicator has stopped oscillating. The ball with the arrow that indicates the position of the airplane in relation to its longitudinal and transverse axis is pressed against the edge of the scale. The vertical speed indicator points to 0. The speed indicator shows that the airplane is moving faster and faster with each passing second. I have to do something to get the instruments back to normal, and as fast as possible, as the altimeter shows that we continue to bear down. The speed indicator soon shows 600 kilometers per hour. It is clear that I am diving almost vertically. I see in the illuminated altimeter the numbers 2300, 2200, 2000, 1800, 1700, 1600, 1300 meters. At this speed, there are only a few seconds left before disaster strikes. Am I wet from rain or sweat? 1300, 1100, 800, 600, 500 meters on the altimeter. Gradually, I manage to get the other instruments to function normally, but I still feel an unsettling pressure on the control stick. I continue to dive. The vertical speed indicator continues to stand at maximum. All the while, I am completely in darkness. Ghostly flickering flashes pierce the darkness, making instrument flight even more difficult. I use both hands on the control stick to bring the airplane level. 500, 400 meters high. The blood rushes to my head. I sob and suck in air. Something inside me asks me to stop fighting the raging elements. Why continue? All my efforts are futile. Only now it reaches me that the altimeter has stopped at 200 meters, but the arrow fluctuates slightly. This means that disaster could follow at any moment. No, the flight continues. Suddenly, there's a heavy thump. Well, I'm definitely dead now. Dead. But if that were the case, I couldn't think. Besides, I hear the roar of the engine. It's just as dark as before. And the imperturbable Sharnovsky says calmly, "Looks like we've hit something." Sharnovsky's unperturbed calm leaves me speechless. But I know one thing, I'm still in the air. And that knowledge helps me focus. It's true that even at full thrust I can't fly any faster, but the instruments show that I'm starting to climb upward. And that's enough. The compass is pointing strictly west, not bad at all. I have to hope this thing is still working. I don't take my eyes off the instruments, as if hypnotizing them by sheer force of will. Our salvation depends on them. I must pull the handle with all my might, or the balloon will slip back into the corner. I steer the airplane carefully, as if it were a living thing. I beg him out loud, and suddenly I think of Faithful Hand and his horse. Sharnovsky interrupts my thoughts. We have 2 holes in our wings, and a couple of birch trees sticking out of them. We also lost a piece of aileron and flap. I look back and realize I've come out of the lowest cloud layer and am now flying above it. It's daylight again. I see that Sharnovsky is right. 2 large holes in each of the wings reach up to the main spar, and there are pieces of birch twigs sticking out of them. I'm beginning to realize. The holes in the wings explain the loss of speed, hence the difficulty in controlling the car. How long can the valiant U-87 stand it? I guess that I must be 50 kilometers from the front line. Now and only now do I remember my load of bombs. I drop them and flying becomes easier. During every sortie, we encounter enemy fighters. Today, one of them won't even need to shoot at me to shoot me down. He just needs to look unfriendly in my direction. Fortunately, I don't see any fighters. Finally, I cross the front line and slowly approach our airfield. I order Sharnovsky to parachute immediately. I give this order in case I can no longer fly the airplane. I recreate in my memory a recent miracle that prolonged my life. A thunderstorm broke. After I had brought the instruments to the working position and leveled the machine, I found myself very close to the ground. At that speed, I must have flown between 2 birch trees, and that's where I picked up those branches. Unprecedented luck. The holes are in the middle of the wings, and the birches did not hit the propeller. Otherwise, the flight would have been over in a few seconds. To keep the flight stable after such a shock and get me home safely would not have been possible for any airplane except the U-87. The return flight takes much longer, but finally I see Soltse right in front of me. The tension subsides and I straighten my shoulders again. Several of our fighters are patrolling over Soltse, and the airfield is just a short distance away. Sharnovsky, you'll need to parachute out over the airfield. I have absolutely no idea what my car looks like from the ground, and how the holes in the wings will affect its aerodynamics on landing. Right now, unnecessary casualties should be avoided if possible. I'm not going to jump. "You'll do fine," he replies in his usual voice. "What's the answer to that?" "The airfield is right below us." I look at him with new eyes, and it looks homely. This is where my plane could rest. Here are my comrades, familiar faces. Somewhere down there hangs my tunic. In my pocket is the last letter I received from home. What did my mother write in it? I should have read it more carefully. The squadron seems to be in formation. Maybe they're getting an assignment for the next flight. In that case, we'd better hurry up. They're all staring at our plane and scattering to make way for me. I get ready to land and slow down as much as possible. Finally landing. My airplane is still hurtling along the ground for a long time. Someone runs beside us for the last 100 meters. I get out of the plane, followed by Sharnovsky with an indifferent look. Here colleagues surround us and pat us on the back. I hurriedly make my way through the welcoming crowd and report to the commander. Pilot Rudel has returned from his mission. Special incident: contact with the ground in the target area. The airplane is temporarily unfit for flight. Steen shakes our hands, a smile on his face. Then he walks to the staff tent. Of course, we have to repeat our story to everyone else. They tell us how they line up to hear the commander's brief memorial speech. Pilot Officer Rudel and his crew attempted to accomplish the impossible. They attacked a target by diving at it through a thunderstorm, and death caught up with them. He had just filled his lungs with air to begin another sentence when our damaged U-87 appeared over the airfield. Steen turned pale with excitement and quickly disbanded the formation. Even now in the tent, he refused to believe that I had not just spiked into the storm, but had been swallowed black because I had flown too close to his airplane the moment it began to make a turn. I assure you it was not on purpose. Nonsense. It was exactly what could have been expected of you. You deliberately stayed behind to attack the station. You overestimate me. The future will prove me right. We're taking off again now. An hour later, I fly beside him in another airplane to bomb targets in the Luga sector. In the evening, I relieve my inner tension and physical fatigue in the game. After that, I do something extremely important. I sleep like a dead man. The next morning, our target is Novgorod, where a large bridge over the Volkhov has collapsed under our bombs. Before it is too late, the Soviets are trying to move as many men and property as possible across the Volkhov and the Lvov, which flows into Lake Ilmen from the south. Therefore, we must continue our attacks on the bridges. Their destruction postpones the crossing, but not for long. We realize this very quickly. Nearby, pontoon bridges are quickly being built. The Soviets are stubbornly patching up the damage we have done to them. These constant flights bring with them symptoms of fatigue, sometimes with discouraging results. The commander notices them very quickly. To avoid mistakes, operational orders from the regiment, which are transmitted by telephone at midnight or even later, must be listened to and recorded by Steen and myself at the same time. On some occasions, a misunderstanding begins in the morning, for which each of us is convinced that it is he who is being scolded by the others. The reason for this is only really universal exhaustion. The commander and I have to listen together to midnight instructions from Air Regiment headquarters. One day, the telephone rings in the headquarters tent. The regimental commander is on the wire. Steen, meet the escort fighters at 5 a.m. over Batayski. The exact location is very important. We search for it on the map with a pocket flashlight, but find no Batayski. Without a clue, we can't guess where the place is. Our despair is as great as Russia's. Finally, Steen says, "I beg your pardon, Mr. Colonel. I can't find this place on the map." Immediately, the angry voice of the regimental commander barks shrilly in a Berlin accent. "What? You call yourself a squadron commander, and you don't know where some Batayskoy is?" "Mr. Colonel, please give me the coordinates," says Steen. A prolonged silence that stretches on indefinitely. Then suddenly, "I'll be damned if I know where this place is myself, but I give you Pekrun. He knows where it is." His adjutant then quietly explains the exact position of the tiny village on the marshes. A peculiar fellow our colonel is. When he is angry or wants to be particularly friendly, he speaks like a typical Berliner. Where discipline and system are concerned, our regiment owes much to him. The epicenter of the struggle is shifting more and more to the north. On September 30, 1941, we are sent to Turkovo, south of Luga, on the northern sector of the Eastern Front. We fly every day over the area of Leningrad, where the army has launched an offensive from the west and from the south. The geographical position of this city, located between the Gulf of Finland and Lake Ladoga, gives the defenders great advantages, since there are very few possible directions for attack. For a while the offensive is slow. It seems that we are just treading water. On September 16, Lieutenant Steen calls us to a meeting. He explains the military situation and tells us that one of the difficulties holding back the further advance of our armies is the presence of the Russian fleet, which cruises along the coast at a certain distance from the shore and interferes in the course of the battle with powerful naval guns. The Russian fleet is based at Kronstadt, on the island of the same name in the Gulf of Finland. It is the largest naval base of the USSR. About 20 kilometers east of Kronstadt is Leningrad. To the south are the ports of Oranienbaum and Peterhof. Around these two cities, on a strip of coastline 10 kilometers long, accumulated very large enemy forces. We are ordered to very accurately mark the positions of our troops on maps to make sure that we are able to recognize our own front line. When Steen gives a different twist to the conversation, we begin to realize that it is these concentrations of troops that will be our targets. He returns to the Russian Navy and explains that the two Russian line ships of greatest concern are the Marat and the October Revolution. Both of these ships have a displacement of 23,000 tons each. In addition to them, there are also 4 or 5 cruisers as well as a number of destroyers. The ships are constantly changing their positions according to which sectors on the mainland require support by their devastating and accurate fire. However, battleships tend to go back and forth only in the deep water channel between Kronstadt and Leningrad. Our squadron has just received orders to attack the Russian fleet in the Gulf of Finland. Conventional bombers and conventional bombs cannot be used for this operation, especially in the face of heavy anti-aircraft fire. Steen tells us that ton bombs equipped with special detonators are expected to arrive. Bombs with ordinary detonators will explode without any effect on the armored upper deck, and although the explosion will undoubtedly damage the superstructures, the ship will remain afloat. We cannot expect to finish off these two Leviathans unless we use time bombs, which will penetrate the deck without detonation and explode deep below in the hull of the ship. A few days later, in inclement weather, we suddenly receive an order to attack the battleship Marat firing on our positions. It had just been detected by a reconnaissance plane. The weather turned bad all the way to Krasnovardisk, 30 kilometers south of Leningrad. The density of cloud cover over the Gulf of Finland is 7/10. The lower edge is at an altitude of 800 meters. This would mean flying through a 2-kilometer layer of clouds. The entire regiment takes to the air and sets a course to the north. Today we have 30 airplanes. According to the staff schedule, we should have 80 machines, but numbers are not always the deciding factor. Unfortunately, the ton bombs have not yet arrived. Since our single-engine Stukas can't fly blind, the leader must rely on the help of only 2 instruments, a roll indicator and a vertical speed sensor. The rest of us keep in formation, huddled together so that we can see our neighbor's wing. If flying in thick, dark clouds, you should never keep the interval between the wingtips more than 3 to 4 meters. If it is greater, we risk losing our neighbor forever and ramming the following aircraft. This thought always causes horror. In such weather, the safety of the entire regiment depends to the highest degree on how the leader flies according to the instruments. Having descended to an altitude of 2 kilometers, we find ourselves in a thick cloud cover. Individual machines are a little out of order. Here they come closer again. The Earth is still not visible. Judging by the clock, we will be over the Gulf of Finland very soon. The cloud cover is getting a little thinner. Below us, the blue sparkles. That's the water. We must be approaching our goal, but where exactly is it? It's impossible to tell because the breaks in the clouds are barely visible. There is no way the cloud cover is 7/10. Only occasionally this thick soup dissolves and opens up individual gaps. Suddenly, through one of these gaps, I see something and immediately contact Steen on the radio. Koenig 2 to Koenig 1. Respond. He responds immediately. Koenig 1 to Koenig 2. Over. I see a large vessel directly below us. Appears to be the Marat. We continue to talk, Steen descending and heading into the gap between the clouds. Without speaking the rest of the way, I also begin to dive. I am followed by Klaus in another staff plane. I can now see the vessel. It is, of course, the Marat. By an effort of will I suppress my excitement. I have only a few seconds to assess the situation and make a decision. It is we who must strike, since it is highly unlikely that all the planes will pass through the window. Both the gap in the clouds and the ship are moving. As long as we're in the clouds, the anti-aircraft guns can only aim by hearing. They won't be able to aim accurately at us. Well, very good. Dive. Drop the bombs and hide in the clouds again. Steen's bombs are on their way. Miss. I press the release of the bomb thrower. My bombs explode on the deck. What a pity they only weigh 500 kilograms. At the same moment, I see the anti-aircraft fire start. I can't afford to watch this for long. The anti-aircraft guns are barking furiously. Over there, other planes are diving through a gap in the clouds. The Soviet anti-aircraft gunners realize where those damned dive bombers are coming from and concentrate their fire at that point. We take advantage of the cloud cover and climb higher and hide in it. However, later on we can no longer leave the area without any repercussions. Once we get home, the guessing game begins. What damage was done to the ship by this direct hit? Naval experts say that it is impossible to achieve complete success with a bomb of this caliber. On the other hand, few optimists believe that it is quite realistic. As if to confirm their opinion, over the next few days our reconnaissance planes, despite the most diligent searches, fail to locate the Marat. In a subsequent operation after my bomb hit, the cruiser sinks within minutes. After the first sortie, our luck with the weather ends. Eternal bright blue skies and murderous barrage fire. In no other theater of war have I seen anything like it. Our intelligence estimates that hundreds of anti-aircraft guns are concentrated in an area of 10 square kilometers in the target area. The shell bursts form entire clouds. We do not hear individual bursts, but an incessant raging sound like the thunder of applause on Judgment Day. The zones of dense fire begin as soon as we cross the coastal strip, which is still in Russian hands. Then come Oranienbaum and Peterhof, their harbors heavily defended. The open water is full of pontoons, barges, boats, and small craft, all packed with anti-aircraft guns. To place their anti-aircraft guns, the Russians use all suitable places. For example, to protect against our submarines, the mouth of the Leningrad harbor is covered with giant steel nets, the ends of which are fixed on concrete blocks that rise above the surface of the water. Anti-aircraft guns fire at us even from these blocks. After another 10 kilometers, we see the island of Kronstadt with its huge naval harbor and the city with the same name. Both the harbor and the city are well fortified. And in addition, the entire Russian Baltic fleet is anchored in and near the harbor, and it is also firing at us. We fly at an altitude of between 3 to 4 kilometers. That's very low, but apart from anything else, we want to hit something right. When dive bombing ships, we use air brakes to slow down. This gives us more time to locate the target and adjust our aim. The more carefully we aim, the better the results of the attack, and it all depends. But by reducing our dive speed, we make it easier for the anti-aircraft gunners, especially when we can't climb fast enough after an attack. But unlike other planes coming from behind, we don't usually try to gain altitude after diving. We use a different tactic and come out of their dive at low altitude near the water. We then have to make extensive evasive maneuvers over the enemy-occupied coastal strip. Only after we have left it behind us can we breathe free again. We return to our airfield at Turkovo in a trance-like state and fill our lungs with air as if we had won the right to breathe. These days are very stressful. During our walks, Steen and I are mostly silent, each of us trying to guess what the other is thinking. Our mission is to destroy the Russian fleet, so we are not situated to discuss the difficulties. Arguing would be a waste of energy. These are our orders, and we obey them. Within the hour, we return to the tent inwardly relaxed and ready to go to this hell again in the morning. During one of these walks with Steen, I break the usual silence and ask him with some hesitation, "How do you manage to be so cool and collected?" He pauses for a moment, looks at me obliquely, and says, "My dear, do not imagine, even for a moment, that I have always been like this. I owe this indifference to hard years of bitter experience. You know, it's bad enough if you don't see your superiors in the service, and if they don't save their differences for the officers' mess tent and can't forget them while on duty, it can be a living hell. But the hardest steel is only made on the hottest fire. And if you walk your own path, without necessarily losing touch with your friends, you get stronger." A long pause. I know now why he understands me so well. Although I'm sure my remarks won't be very statutory, I tell him. When I was a cadet, I promised myself that if I was ever trusted to command, I would never act like some of my superiors. Steen, after being quiet for a moment, adds, "There are other things that make a man." Few of our comrades realize this and are able to understand my serious outlook on life. I was once engaged to a girl I loved. She died the day we were to be married. When that happens to you, it's not easy to forget. I go back to the tent in silence. I think about Steen for a long time afterward. I understand him better now than I did before. I realize how much it means at the front to have such understanding between people and quiet conversations that give strength. Talking is not for a soldier. He expresses himself quite differently from a civilian. And since war strips a man of pretentiousness, the things a soldier says, even if they take the form of oaths or primitive sentimentality, are entirely sincere and genuine, and therefore better than all that civilian rhetoric. On September 21, ton bombs arrive at our airfield. The next morning reconnaissance reports that Marat is standing at the Kronstadt harbor pier. Apparently, they are repairing damage sustained during our attack on the 16th. That's it. The day has come when I will prove my ability to fly. I get all the information I need about the wind and everything else from the scouts. Then I become deaf to everything around me. If I fly to my target, I can't miss. I've got to hit it. We take off, absorbed in thoughts of the attack. Ton bombs beneath us that should do the job today. Bright blue sky, not a cloud in sight. It's the same over the sea. Over the narrow coastal strip, we are attacked by Russian fighters, but they cannot prevent us from reaching the target. We fly at an altitude of 3 kilometers. Anti-aircraft fire is deadly. With this rate of fire, we can expect a hit at any moment. Dorl, Steen, and I stay on course. We tell ourselves that Ivan is not firing at individual airplanes. He is simply saturating the sky with bursts at a certain altitude. Other pilots believe that by changing altitude and course, they make it difficult for the anti-aircraft gunners. One plane even dropped a bomb a few minutes before approaching the target. But our 2 staff planes with blue noses go straight through the formation. Wild confusion in the air over Kronstadt. The danger of collision is great. We are still a few miles from our objective. Ahead I can already see the Marat standing at the pier in the harbor. The guns are firing. Shells are bursting, the bursts forming little curly clouds that frolic around us. If it weren't all so murderously serious, you might even think it was an aerial carnival. I look down at the Marat. Behind him is the Kirov cruiser, or is it the Maxim Gorky? These ships haven't been involved in the shelling yet. It was the same last time. They don't fire on us until we start diving. Never has our flight through barrage fire seemed so slow and unpleasant. Will Steen use the air brakes today, or faced with taky fire, will he not release them? Here he was entering the dive. The brakes are in the released position. I follow him, casting one last glance into his cockpit. His grim face is focused. We're going down together. The dive angle must be about 70 to 80 degrees. I've already caught the Murat in the scope. We rush straight towards it. Gradually it grows to gigantic size. All its anti-aircraft guns are pointed directly at us. Nothing matters now. Only our goal, our mission. If we reach our goal, it will save our brothers in arms on Earth from this carnage. But what happened? Steen's plane suddenly leaves me far behind. He's diving much faster. Maybe he removed the air brakes to increase his speed. I do the same thing. I chase after his plane. I'm right on his tail, going much faster, and can't damp down the speed. Straight ahead, I can see the horror-stricken face of Lemon, Stein's gunner. Every second, he expects me to cut the tail of their plane with my propeller and ram them. I'm increasing the dive angle. It must be almost 90 degrees now. I miraculously just barely miss Steen's plane by a hair. Does that bode well? The ship is exactly in the center of my sight. My U-87 is holding steady on course. It's not moving an inch. I get the feeling it's impossible to miss. Then right in front of me I see a larger-than-life Murat. Sailors are running across the deck, hauling ammunition. I hit the bomb thrower switch and pull the handle toward me with all I might. Will I still be able to get out of the dive? I doubt it because I am diving without brakes, and the altitude at which I dropped the bomb did not exceed 300 meters. During the briefing, the commander said that a ton bomb should be dropped from a height of 1 kilometer, because that was the height at which the shrapnel would fly, and dropping the bomb at a lower height would mean the possible loss of the aircraft. But now I've forgotten all about that. I'm going to hit the Murat. I'm pulling the handle with all I might. The acceleration is too great. I can't see anything. Everything goes black in front of my eyes, a sensation I've never experienced before. I have to get out of the dive, if I can do that at all. My vision has not yet fully returned to me when I hear Charnovsky exclaim, "Explosion!" I look around. We're flying over the water at a height of only 3 to 4 meters, with a slight roll. Behind us lies Murat, a cloud of smoke above him rising to a height of half a kilometer. Obviously, the gun cellars have exploded. "Congratulations, Mr. Lieutenant." Charnovsky is first. Immediately, the airwaves start buzzing. Congratulations are pouring in from other planes. I can hear from all sides. What a sight! Wait a minute. Do I recognize the voice of the regiment commander? I feel a sense of excitement, like after a successful track and field event. Then I imagine looking into the eyes of thousands of grateful infantrymen. We're heading back at low altitude toward the coast. 2 Russian fighters, Charnovsky reports. Where are they? Chasing us. They're flying over their fleet right in the bursts of anti-aircraft shells. They're about to be shot down by their own. This verbosity, and among other things, the excitement in Charnovsky's voice is something new to me. It has never happened to him before. We're flying flush with the concrete blocks on which the anti-aircraft guns are mounted. We can blow the artillery personnel out to sea with our wings. They keep firing at our comrades attacking other ships. For a moment, everything is enveloped by a column of smoke from the downed Murat. The rumbling there near the surface of the water must be terrible, because the anti-aircraft gunners only notice my plane when it roars right over their heads. Then they turn their guns around and fire back at me, ignoring the main formation flying above. Luck has not deserted me. The place is full of anti-aircraft guns. The air is saturated with shrapnel. Now crossing the coastal strip. This narrow strip is a dangerous place. I'm not gaining altitude because I can't do it fast enough. So I stay down and fly over the very heads of the Russians. They rush to the ground in panic. Then Charnovsky suddenly shouts, "Reta is coming in from behind." I look back and see a Russian fighter 100 meters behind us. "Charnovsky, shoot!" Charnowski doesn't make a sound. Ivan whizzes past at a distance of only a few centimeters. I try to maneuver. What are you, Charnowski? Are you crazy? Fire. I'll put you under arrest. I yell at him. Charnowski doesn't fire. Then he speaks slowly. I'm not firing, Mr. Lieutenant, because I see a Messerschmitt approaching from behind, and if I open fire on the Rada, I might accidentally hit it. That closes the subject as Charnowski realizes it, but a sweat breaks out on me. Tracers pass right and left. I rock the car from side to side like a madman. You can turn around. The me shot down that Rada. I tilt the plane and look back. A Messerschmitt is passing us. Charnowski, it will be a great pleasure to confirm a shoot down for our pilot. He doesn't answer, most likely offended that I didn't trust his judgment sooner. I know him, he'll sit there and sulk until we land. How many sorties have we flown together when he wouldn't open his lips the entire time we were in the air? After we land, all the crews are lined up in front of the headquarters tent. Steen tells us that the regimental commander has already called and congratulated the 3rd Squadron on their success. He personally witnessed the spectacular explosion. Steen is ordered to report the name of the officer who delivered the decisive blow to recommend him for the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Looking at me, he says, "Forgive me. I told the Commodore that I was so proud of the whole squadron that I would prefer to reward everyone for this success." In the tent, he shakes my hand. "You won't read more about this battleship in the dispatches," he says with a boyish laugh. The regimental commander calls. "Today is sinking ships day for the 3rd. Depart immediately for another attack on the Kirov, anchored behind the wreck of the Murat." Successful hunting. Photographs taken by the very last plane show the Murat broken in two. This can be seen in the photo, which was taken after the huge cloud of smoke began to dissipate. The phone rings again. "Steen, did you get a look at where my bomb fell?" "I didn't see it, and neither did Pikrun. It fell into the sea, Mr. Colonel, a few minutes before the attack." We youngsters in the tent struggle to keep our faces unperturbed. A brief crackle in the receiver, and that's all. We don't blame our colonel, who is old enough to be our fathers. He probably got nervous and pressed the bomb thrower switch prematurely. He deserves all the credit for flying such difficult missions with us himself. There's a big difference between 50-year-old pilots and 25-year-old pilots. This is especially true for those who fly dive bombers. We're getting ready to attack the Kirov again. Steen had a small accident while taxiing on the ground after the first sortie. One wheel drove into a crater. His plane damaged the propeller. The 7th Squadron provides us with a replacement, but Steen runs into an obstacle again, and that airplane also fails. There are no replacements, and all the airplanes participate in the sortie. No one from HQ flies except myself. Steen gets out of the airplane and climbs onto my wing. "I know you'll be mad at me for taking your plane, but since I'm the commander, I have to fly with the squadron. For this sortie, I'm taking your Charnowski with me." Annoyed and angry, I go to the workshops and do some work as an engineer officer for a while. An hour and a half later, the squadron returns. "Unit, the staff plane with the blue nose, my plane, is missing. I assume that the commander made an emergency landing on our side of the front." Once all my colleagues have landed, I ask what happened to the commander. No one gives me a straight answer until one of them says, "Steen spiked the Kirov and took a direct hit at an altitude of 2.5 to 3 kilometers. The anti-aircraft shell damaged the tail and the plane lost control. I saw him trying to point his plane directly at the cruiser, working ailerons, but missed and fell into the sea. The explosion of his ton bomb caused serious damage to the Kirov. The loss of our commander and my faithful Corporal Charnowski, a heavy blow to the entire squadron, becomes the tragic peak of an otherwise successful day. That great guy Charnowski is dead. Steen is dead. Both were exemplary soldiers in their own way, and no one can replace them. They were lucky and died at a time when they were still convinced that after all this suffering Germany and the whole of Europe would be free. The senior captain from headquarters temporarily assumes command of the squadron. I choose Private First Class Henschel as my gunner. He was sent to us from the reserve in Graz, where he flew with me in training. From time to time I take others with me, first our financier, then an intelligence officer, but none of them would particularly take care of my life. Then I started taking Henschel with me all the time, and he was transferred to our headquarters. He always gets furious if I don't take him with me and someone else flies in his place. He's jealous of me like a little girl. We make combat sorties over the Gulf of Finland until the end of September, and we manage to sink another cruiser. We have no luck with the second battleship, the October Revolution. It is damaged by smaller caliber bombs, but not very seriously. When we manage to get a hit with a ton bomb during one of the raids, it does not explode. Despite the most serious investigation, we are unable to determine what happened to it. So the Soviets managed to save one battleship. A lull is established in the Leningrad sector, and we are needed in a key direction. We have made the infantry's fate easier. The Russian positions along the coast are cut in two and the blockade of the city is established. But Leningrad has not fallen, because the defenders held the Ladoga Lake and thus preserved the main line, which was used to supply the fortress. We performed several more missions on the Volkhov and Leningrad fronts. During the last sortie, the air is quiet, and we begin to feel as if something is brewing somewhere in another part of the front. We are sent back to the central sector of the Eastern Front, and as soon as we get there, we see the infantry preparing for new battles. There are rumors of an offensive in the direction of Kalinin-Yaroslav. Taking off from the airbase Moshna Kulachevka, we fly over Orazhev and land in Styritsa. Lieutenant Preitler replaces our last commander as squadron commander. He came to us from a neighboring regiment. The cold weather gradually sets in, and we get our first glimpse of the approaching winter. The drop in temperature brings me, an engineering officer, all types of technical problems. Suddenly, we begin to experience trouble with our airplanes that is only partially attributable to the cold. It takes a long time before experience teaches me how to deal with these problems. The senior mechanics are concerned, especially now that everyone is doing their best to get as many airplanes in the air as possible. My mechanic also has an accident. He's unloading bombs from a truck when one of them flips over and flattens his toes with the stabilizer. I'm standing next to him when it happens. For a long time he can't say anything. Then he comments, looking regretfully at his toe, "I can't jump any longer now." The weather hasn't really turned chilly yet. The dreary sky is covered with clouds. Our troops have taken Kalinin, but the Soviets are resisting desperately and still hold positions near the city. For our divisions, the offensive will be difficult, especially now that the weather is playing into the Russians' hands. In addition, the continuous fighting has severely reduced the fighting capacity of our troops. Our supply lines are working intermittently because the main road between Styritsa and Kalinin is in the hands of the enemy, who is putting us under severe pressure. I shall soon see for myself how difficult and confused the situation is. There are very few airplanes fit to fly. The reasons are casualties, weather, and so on. I am flying lead, in the absence of the commander, to Torjok, a railroad junction northwest of Kalinin. Our targets are the railroad station and rear supply lines. The weather's bad, clouds at 600 meters. That's very low to attack a target with extremely strong air defense. In case the weather deteriorates to such an extent that it prevents our flight back, we are ordered to land at the airfield in Kalinin. We have to wait a long time for a fighter escort to the rendezvous point. They never showed up. Most likely the weather is too bad for them. But by waiting for them, we have wasted a lot of fuel. We fly around Torjok at medium altitude, trying to find the weakest defenses. At first glance, it seems that the defenses are strong everywhere. But then, finding the most suitable place, we break through and attack the railway station. I am delighted when after the attack all our planes fly in formation behind me. The weather deteriorates further. It is snowing thickly. We might have enough fuel left to fly to Styritsa if we didn't have to make such a big detour because of the weather. I make a quick decision and set a course for the closer Kalinin. Besides, the sky looks brighter in the east. We land in Kalinin. Everyone is running around in helmets. The planes of the neighboring air regiment are already here. As soon as I turn off the ignition, I hear and see tank shells bursting on the airfield. Some airplanes are already pierced by shrapnel. I hurry to find the headquarters of the unit transferred here to get a more accurate picture. From what I learn, it appears that we have no time to maintain the planes. The Soviets are attacking the airfield with tanks supported by infantry. They are only 1.5 kilometers away from us. Only a small number of infantry defends our perimeter. The iron monsters can pounce on us at any moment. We Stukas are a real gift for the ground troops defending the positions. Together with Henschel 123s from the Fighter Bomber Regiment, we make constant raids on the tanks until the evening. We land only a few minutes after takeoff. The ground personnel work tirelessly. Everyone realizes that as long as the tanks are not taken out of action, we are in danger. We spend the night in the barracks on the southern edge of town. We are awakened by some sound like the creaking of millstones. Is it our tractor trailer changing position, or is it Ivan and his tanks? In the morning, our infantrymen tell us that yesterday several tanks stormed into town through our forward posts, firing at anyone who appeared in sight. That's where that rumble of guns was coming from. Our artillery in the rear is firing at the Russians, shells whizzing right over our heads. The nights are dark as in a pit. The clouds are very low. Air battles are fought at a very low altitude. When the supply road is cut, the battle-weary troops are short of ammunition, but they continue to fight. The sudden 40-degree cold freezes ordinary grease. Our onboard weapons can't fire. They say the cold has no effect on the Russians because they are well prepared for winter. We have constant problems with the right equipment. Its shortage seriously undermines our forces in this cold. Supplies are almost never reaching us. The locals can't recall such a harsh winter in the last 20 or 30 years. The battle with the cold is harder than the battle with our enemies. The Soviets could not have a more valuable ally. Our tankers complain that the tank turrets won't turn. Everything is frozen. We stay in Kalinin for several days and make constant combat sorties. Soon we know every ditch here. The front line has moved a few kilometers to the east of our airfield, and we return to the base in Staritsa, where they are waiting for us. From here we continue combat sorties in the direction of Ostashkov. Then we are ordered to move to Gorstovo, near Rusa, 80 kilometers from Moscow. Our divisions, thrown here, are pressing forward along the Mozhaysk-Moscow highway. Tank group advancing through Zvenigorod-Istra is 10 kilometers from the Russian capital. Another group has made its way even further east and has taken 2 bridgeheads in the north of the city on the east bank of the Volga-Moscow Canal, one of them in Mitrov. It is December and the thermometer has dropped below 40 to 50 degrees below zero. Clouds are floating low, anti-aircraft guns are rampant. Pilot Klaus, an exceptionally gifted pilot, and one of the few veterans, is killed, perhaps by an accidental hit from a Russian tank gun. Here, as in Kalinin, the weather is our main enemy and the savior of Moscow. The Russian soldiers are fighting desperately, but they too are exhausted, and without this ally they could not stop our advance. Even fresh Siberian regiments thrown into battle would not have been a decisive force. The German armies are defeated by the cold. Trains hardly run at all. There are no reserves or supplies. The wounded cannot be removed from the battlefield. Iron determination alone is not enough. We have reached the limit of our ability to fight. The essentials are gone. Cars are standing. Transportation is down. There is no fuel or ammunition. The only form of transportation is a sledge. Tragic scenes of retreat are becoming more frequent. We have very few airplanes left. At low temperatures, the engines do not live long. Whereas before, when we had the initiative, we flew out to support our ground troops. Now we fight to hold back the advancing Soviet forces. It has been some time since we were pushed back from the Volga-Moscow Canal. We can't hold the big dam northeast of Klin. The Spanish Blue Division, after desperate resistance, must evacuate Klin. Soon, it will be our turn. Christmas is approaching, and Ivan is still advancing towards Volokholamsk, northwest of us. We stand with the headquarters squadron at the local school and sleep on the floor of a large classroom. Every morning when I get up, I get a repeat of my nightly mutterings. The other part of the squadron is stationed in the clay-lined huts that are common here. When you enter them, you feel as if you had been transported back 3 centuries to some primitive country. The men smoke low-grade tobacco, which they call mahorka, and clouds of smoke envelop everything. When you get used to them, you can glimpse the best piece of furnishings, a huge stone stove painted with lime. Around it 3 generations live, eat, laugh, cry, are born and die. In wealthy homes, there is usually a fence in front of the furnace with a piglet and other domestic animals. After dark, select and fat bedbugs dive at you from the ceiling with a precision that make them truly the stuff of the insect world. There is a stinking stuffiness in the house, but men and women don't seem to pay any attention to it. They don't know any different. Their ancestors have lived this way for centuries. They are living and will continue to do so. Only the present generation must have lost the art of storytelling. Maybe they live too close to Moscow. The Moscow River flows through our village on its way to the Kremlin. When we don't fly because of bad weather, we play hockey on its ice. It's the only way we can keep our muscles supple, although some of us get injured during the game. Our adjutant, for example, almost broke his nose. But the game distracts us from the sad events at the front. After a furious match on the ice of the Moscow River, I always go to the sauna. There are several of these steamy Finnish baths in the village. However, it is so dark and slippery there that one day I step on the sharp edge of a shovel standing against the wall and fall, receiving a cut wound. The Soviets have bypassed us from the north. It is high time to fly to another airfield in the rear. But we can't do that. For many days, the clouds have been hanging so low that flying is impossible. There is a lot of snow on the airfield. If we are unlucky, Ivan will knock on our door like Santa Claus. It is safe to say that the Russian units that have circled us are not aware of our presence. Otherwise, they would have nailed us here long ago. So we spend Christmas still at the Gorstov school. As darkness thickens, we are plunged into silence and flinch at any sound. But after our Christmas singing, the gloomy mood soon fades. A couple of glasses of vodka can set even the most moderate on edge. After lunch, we are visited by the regimental commander to present awards. I am the first in our squadron receives the Golden Cross. On the 1st of January, we vainly send an invitation to our fellow pilots in Moscow to fly to us for a Christmas match. There is no reply, and we play hockey ourselves on the ice of the Moscow River. The bad weather sticks around for many days. As soon as it improves, we prepare to relocate to the west, going over dense forests and then over the highway in the direction of Vyazma. When we take off, the weather deteriorates and we fly in close formation over the very tops of the trees. Even then, it is very difficult not to lose sight of each other. Everything is in a gray shroud, a swirling mixture of fog and snow. The success of the flight depends on the skill of the leader. These flights require much more effort than the hottest sorties. This is a black day for us. We lost several crews who were not up to the task. Over Vyazma, we turn right and fly towards Sakhevka. We land in deep snow at Dujino, 20 kilometers south of Sakhevka, and are housed at the local collective farm. The relentless cold continues, and finally the necessary equipment and winter clothing arrives by air. Every day transport planes land at our airfield, bringing fur garments, skis, sleds, and other items. But all this is too late to capture Moscow. Too late to bring back our comrades who have frozen from the cold. Too late to save the tens of thousands of soldiers who have frostbitten fingers and toes. Too late for the army to keep moving forward. It is forced to entrench and go on the defensive under the blows of an unimaginably hard winter. We are now flying over areas we remember from last summer. The area around the source of the Volga River west of Rzhev, near Rzhev itself, along the railroad line to Olenino and farther south. Deep snow makes it difficult for our troops to move, but the Soviets are in their element. The smartest technician here is the one who uses the most primitive methods of operation and movement. The engines won't start anymore. Everything is frozen to death. The hydraulics have failed. Relying on any technical tool means suicide. At these temperatures, engines cannot be started in the morning, although we cover them with straw mats and blankets. Mechanics often spend all night in the field, warming up the engines every half hour so that they can be started when the squadron has to fly. Frostbite is common during these terribly cold nights. As an engineering officer, I spend all my time between flights with the technicians so that I don't miss a chance to put at least one more airplane into service. We rarely freeze in the air. In bad weather, we have to fly low and defenses are strong. Everyone is too busy to notice the cold. Of course, this does not guarantee us against finding symptoms of frostbite when we return to the warmth. In early January, General von Richthofen lands on our field in his Storch, and in the name of the Führer awards me the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. The order specifically recognizes my successful missions against ships and bridges last year. The cold is getting worse and increasing the difficulty of keeping the planes operational for the next day's sorties. I have seen desperate mechanics trying to warm up the engines with open flames. One of them says to me, they're either going to start now or they're going to burn to charcoal. If they don't start, they're no good anyway. Anyway, fires seem to me too radical a method of solving our problem, so I think of another way. The fuel can be burned in a small tin stove. We can attach a pipe with a grate to it to contain the sparks. We place this device under the engine and build a fire, positioning the pipe so that the primary pump is heated by it. We wait until there is no result. This is a primitive solution, but just right for the Russian winter. We get sophisticated heaters and all sorts of technical devices. They are wonderfully designed, but unfortunately they rely on the operation of fragile machinery like small motors or complex devices themselves. They have to be started first for the whole structure to work, but that's exactly what the cold does not do. Throughout the winter we have very few airplanes in service. These few airworthy machines are piloted by old, experienced crews, so that the deficiencies in quantity are to some extent compensated for by quality. For several days we fly to the area of the Sykevka-Rzhev Railroad, where the Russians are trying to break through the front. Our airfield finds itself in the same situation as a few weeks ago, when we were stationed in Kalinin. This time there are no ground troops to hold our front, and one night the Ivans, advancing from Sykevka, suddenly find themselves on the outskirts of Dugino. Kraskin, commander of our commandant company, assembles a combat team drawn from our ground personnel and units nearby and holds the airfield. Our brave mechanics spend the nights in the trenches with rifles in their hands and return to their aircraft maintenance duties during the day. Nothing can happen during the day because we still have a supply of fuel and bombs at the airfield. For 2 days in a row we are attacked by cavalry and skiff battalions. Then the situation becomes critical, and we drop bombs near the perimeter of our airfield. Soviet casualties are high. Then Kraskin, in peacetime a sportsman, together with his group undertakes an offensive. We circle above them, firing and dropping bombs on those trying to hold off their counterattack. Once again, the approaches to the airfield are cleared of the enemy. At the beginning of the war, Luftwaffe soldiers never imagined that they would be used in such a capacity. Armored units of our army expand our conquests, retake Sykevka, and place their headquarters there. The situation is again more or less stabilized, and our sector is covered by a new front established along the Gzhatsk-Rzhev line. The days of monotonous retreat are behind us.